Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Episode 13, Anomalous America. Moving right along without delay, without further delay, I should say. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining me this early hour. Oh, let's make sure everything's working. Okay. Everyone hear me okay? Chat's working. Video's up. Okay. Yeah, so as always, um, thanks for being here early in the morning. Arkansas. What an interesting place. Um, it's a place I've spent a day and nothing more, regretfully so. Um, but again, like with all of these states that we've gone through, I've actually spent the least amount of time in this one, believe it or not. I've spent a fair amount in every state that I've covered so far, and this would be the least. Um, as always, lots of interesting topics to cover, lots of material to get through. Um, and yeah, welcome to August, everybody. Um, feel pretty good about starting off the month with an Anomalous America episode. Next week, I'm going to be doing Missouri, and the following week will be Tennessee. Really looking forward to both of those states. Probably two of my most densely packed as far as material goes, and yeah, should be super interesting. I think all of the episodes have been interesting, but Missouri and Tennessee are just lots of crazy stuff has happened there. Um, but yeah, as always, good to see you. Let some people trickle in. I'm gonna try and find do a quick little wiki dive. For those of you that are members, there'll be the last of the Lemuria video series today, and I'm going to be covering a really special book, and then I'm going to be doing a 10,000 subscriber live stream, whatever day that happens. Could be tomorrow, could be Thursday, don't know. So stay tuned for that. I got one of my favorite articles I've been holding on to for a long time, and just kind of I had already planned a segment for it, but um, you know what I'll do? I'll give a little teaser clip of it. Um, ba, 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 ba. Uh, hmm, that's annoying. Okay. Hmm. Well, we got to figure out these bugs before I share my screen again. Stop. That's weird. Mm, apologize. Give me a second. I can't share images. That's not good. So the caption for the article I'll be presenting in my 10,000 subscriber live stream, whatever day that is called R our plains 12,000 years behind Atlantis. And it's going to cover Ancients Knew a Combination Airship Submarine Without Wings or Engines. It's very interesting. You guys are going to love it. It shows a correlation between ships without wings that go in and out of the water. They're kind of cigar shaped, kind of correlates with stuff people see today. And yeah, that'll be a fun one. Full page, pretty cool. Lots of overlays with, quote, UFO sightings of today, the articles from the 1800s. But yeah, so let's figure out why I can't present. That's annoying. Hmm? Oh, all right. Well, I just couldn't share that image, so that's good. Let's see if we can make sure I can share. Hmm. Yeah, that's not good. Okay. Tell me if you guys can see this image because it just shows a whirling, failing to load symbol. Hopefully you can. We'll figure it out as we go. Um, yeah. So as always, thanks for joining me early in the morning. Pretty much one of the very few times I can regularly schedule something like this. When the whole house is quiet and asleep. We're gonna jump into City of the Ancients. This is from 1899. Um, Kind of a good way to start things off. I planned on doing a preview video, but super busy weekend, so no time for that. But yeah, let's jump into it here. Let's just get into some material because we always run out of time and never get to share enough material. So, welcome again, everybody. Longo, thanks for being here, and everyone else. Again, 1899. We're going to be zooming right down the middle here. City of the Ancients. Kind of the underlying theme of this one is going to be Subterranean Arkansas. Um, the Ozarks is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in America. And for those that are familiar, I saw somebody from Missouri. Yeah, somebody's already talking about the Ozarks. It's one of my favorite places. I haven't got to spend too much time there, but I have seen it with my own eyes, and wow. Yeah, we're going to talk about some of my really old posts on Twitter. Stretching back over 5 years now. But yeah, let's get into it here. City of the Ancients, supposed to have had a population of 11 million. Ruins of a great metropolis claimed to have been discovered in southern Arkansas. The Fontaine in New Orleans. Despite the unfriendly criticisms of certain learned professors, I stand by my brief announcement of my discovery of the remains of a vast prehistoric city in Arkansas. However, people prefer to pronounce it. I've heard both. And since the statement has attracted so much attention, I realize that it is my duty to add further particulars and details of the discovery. With the experience of 50 years as an explorer to aid me in my research, I visited the counties of Ashley, Desha, and Drew in the southeastern section of Arkansas, where I found a vast area covered by tumuli of the mound builders. So yeah, tumuli, for those who aren't aware, is just a older rendition of the word mound. There could be no doubt at all in any of mind, with the evidence before it was before me, that this was the grand metropolis of the prehistoric race known as the mound builders. I surveyed an area of 35 miles west and 25 miles north, embracing a territory of not less than 560,000 square acres. And be it understood This did not cover the whole of the ground on which the city has been built, for the tumuli reached far beyond the regions traversed by me. On each acre there were about 4 mounds, and on a close examination of these disclosed to my great delight the remains of fireplaces and the shattered crockery used in cooking. Now, again, for those that are familiar with this series, I've made a pretty serious distinction between mounds as burial places and mounds as habitations. Some of the largest mounds ever uncovered were actually found in the southwestern states, southern parts of Colorado, where they found mounds or mountains. They label them as both. No coincidence that mounds and mountains are similar. One of these mountains was actually a city, one huge building that inhabited thousands of people. And this wasn't the only one. They found these in Utah and Arizona. So the kind of misnomer. And as we get into Missouri, we're really going to blow that to pieces. We're going to show that these mounds were habitations, cities. They had subterranean highways connecting them. And yeah, it's going to get really interesting. But I want to make this distinction here that a lot of in the 1800s, this was, I would say, 20% of mounds were considered habitations, or they didn't ever use the word buried building, but that's what a lot of them are. They're buried buildings. Um, and, the size of the mound determined obviously by the amount of land and earth that had been buried upon it. Now, often they'd go as far as to say that these burying events were done on purpose, but the amount of earth and the amount of square footage, again, as we're covering here, right? We're talking about 560,000 square acres. That's absolutely ginormous. And sure, some of these mounds um, were absolutely um, man-made in their shaping as far as the earth that was put on top of them. But we're talking about buried mounds and thousands of them, especially along the Arkansas River and Mississippi. In some, an even closer examination revealed the charred remains of the bones of deer, bear, turkeys, squirrel, and fish. Now, the turkey um, thing is just important to remember. Remember, the turkey was sacred to the Santa Fe um, tribes, Arizona, Utah, where turkeys do not exist naturally, of course. We had mummies wrapped in turkey feathers. We had turkeys mummified, buried. If you guys remember my New Mexico episode, we talked about Emperor Tigrinus. He was the red-headed giant, and it was the oldest red-headed mummy ever found, and it was found here in America. Red-headed mummies have been found all over the world. Now, he was buried with 2 stone battle axes. In his tomb, the walls were beautifully painted as a kind of story of his life. They found 3 different phenotypes, skeletal types, living in this city. And on top of the city, there were 2 further civilizations. We're not talking like a 3-story building. We're talking literally a burial event, another city habitation group of people, and then another one on top of that. And you've heard me reference often the Aztecs discuss 4 events that wiped out civilization as we know it. I don't necessarily say that all these events were covered the whole entire realm, but I think some of them came at different periods and only touched certain parts of the realm. The American Southwest, I believe, was hit much harder than other parts of America. But yeah, the turkey reference is key. We're going to cover that in a book probably towards the end of this presentation and show The turkey worship goes all the way to the Aztecs, the Toltecs, and the Mayans. It exists there. The turkey was renowned, and um, I've mentioned this before, but for those who haven't heard it, Benjamin Franklin wanted the turkey to be the national bird, not the bald eagle, and it became very close to being chosen. And the turkey references with the phoenix. This is why Emperor Tigrinus was mummified with the turkey. The symbolism of the turkey and the feathers, as we've seen with the peacock and the Bennu bird and many others, were indicative of death and rebirth. And we're going to find some of the chieftains, uh, kings and queens, um, not only being mummified in turkey feathers, but having dresses made of turkey feathers. So it's kind of a marker in relation again, as we've shown the Aztecs were um, living well in the American Southwest, and I believe along the Mississippi as well. So, yeah, sorry, let's get back to this article. So immense was the prehistoric city through which I traveled that I am satisfied New York, Chicago, London, and Paris could be placed inside its area. Making an estimate on the basis that each dwelling of the great city contained 5 inhabitants, I computed that at least 11 million people must have lived in this prehistoric place. Now, again, that may seem drastic, but again, going back through all my episodes, that's an underlying feature that is incredibly hard to dismiss. As we've shown, the largest buildings ever found were found throughout Arizona, Utah, and Colorado, some being miles and miles long, some housing millions of people. The canal systems in Arizona alone, with a very reserved estimation, fed at least 100 million people. And I'd go much farther than that. And these buildings and these advanced construction that we find often one or two civilizations below Earth are very advanced, where the stone becomes monolithic. And yeah, technology gets more advanced the deeper we go, which is very odd. Not really in the kind of, um, not really, when we think about all the things I've shown here, that seems to be the norm. And remember, it started off with this guy saying he was being ridiculed by who? The learned professors, of course. Right? It's kind of what we have going on today, and this is 1899. But this man has 50 years of experience, and it correlates nicely with all the other things we've been discussing. So let's get back into it. It was an awe-inspiring, thrilling to reflect, standing there amid the ruins of the dwelling places of countless millions of the prehistoric race that dwelt in the Yazoo Valley. Now, you've heard me talk about the Yazoo Valley. Um, in the Mississippi episode, I read ancient river names, showing that many of the river names of the world trace their origins to America and to North America, especially. And the Yazoo River exists on every continent. This is a very interesting name. And guess what else exists on every continent with the Yazoo River? Mound building. So I don't think there is a mistaken correlation there. And as we've been stating, a lot of these, areas covered in mounds, are they buried cities? Well, that's exactly what this man says, and that's what we've been pointing out pretty much in every episode, all the way back to Alaska, where remember they found thousands of mounds and they were conical. And who was the most famous for building very steep sided conical mounds, conical point, like a pointed hat, birthday hat? Well, it was the Etruscans. And the Etruscans have a lot of overlays here in the Mississippi Valley as well. That here lived the mysterious people who antedated any inhabitants known to have lived on our continent. This valley of the Yazoo was their field. The entire delta was in a high state of cultivation. Every acre was utilized for agricultural purposes. Thousands of canals were dug and used for irrigation and navigation, and the pottery discovered shows that they manufactured superior articles of earthenware for domestic purposes. I found nothing in the course of my explorations to throw any light on the reason why the prehistoric builders erected their colossal structures in mound fashion. Perhaps they were intended for defense, but it is certain that the mounds were built in military formation and were provided with cisterns for water. Now, the water feature here is really important. We're going to get into some crazy mineral spring stuff. That's a big fascination of mine. Is anyone's aware of my radium work? Radium was alive and well in Arkansas and the Ozarks as well. Um, Green glowing caverns is a theme found in Arkansas. There's even an interesting story of tall, blue-skinned men found in a deep, deep cavern living below ground. And um, I'm well acquainted with Cherokee lore. The Cherokee describe a earthen people that lived below ground who had blue skin, or they had very pale skin. And the blue skin is a reference to being able to see their veins, which is very common when you're dealing with a cave dwelling type of society, especially if they've spent a large amount of time underground, several generations. They lose all pigment. Um, but yeah, they described these people as tall, blue skinned men living below the earth. And in some of the Cherokee lore, they go as far as to even say that they were descendants of Noah, who, because of a cataclysm, were forced to live underground. And we've talked a lot about plasma and petrifactions and events of that sort. Um, and for anyone who heard my interview with the Higher Side Chats, you'll know the article I'm speaking of. Um, a man descends into a cave in southern Canada and travels all along the Rocky Mountains, but underground, thousands of miles, living there, describing the most incredible underground city. I plan on doing a full read through of that article here this month. When, I don't know. But yeah, stay tuned for that. So let's get back to this. Where was I? Cisterns for water. The erections surveyed by me were of the usual height, ranging from 5 to 30 feet, while the areas enclosed were from 25 to 40 acres in extent, and a few much larger. Now, remember, we talked about the cisterns in these large cities. They can be attributed to military, but I disagree. They showed a lot of the similar constructions in Colorado and Arizona. When you're dealing with a huge cluster of population, you're going to have a cistern because it just doesn't make sense to have thousands and thousands of people all wandering out to the river or to the canal to get water every day. And obviously, the best water was found underground. So the cisterns were often connected with these same underground streams. So I think we're describing as this man's kind of postulating very, very large cities, and when he's describing that only a certain uh, amount of the city is above ground, that's because I would say, as we've shown strongly, a huge portion of the city is completely buried. Up to 100 feet below Earth. It will be interesting in connection with the discovery of this metropolis of the mound builders to review briefly the known facts of the work of these ancient people. To begin from the north, that portion of the United States which lies between the Appalachians and the Rocky Mountains presents in three groups at once the oldest and rudest monuments of bygone times. The first group, extending from the sources of the Allegheny to the waters of the Mississippi, Missouri, the second occupying the Mississippi Valley, vaguely so defined, and the third stretching from South Carolina to Texas. These several groups, apparently with very little difference among themselves, consist of numberless mounds and circumvallations of earth and stone, 1,500 of the latter and 10,000 of the former. Now, as we get farther up the Mississippi, we're going to show that Ohio alone. Okay, wow, look at this. I should have just finished my sentence. And 10,000 of the former being said to stud Ohio alone. Yeah, so Ohio, the land of mounds, 10,000 mounds alone in Ohio. The erections themselves range from 5 to 30 feet in height, while the areas enclosed generally have some symmetrical figure, such as a circle or an ellipse, rectangular parallelogram, or rectangular polygon, vary from 20 to 40 acres. Now, again, when we get into Missouri, we're really going to dive into exposing the underground uh, of these mounds and how they go far, far underground, and they have huge subterranean worlds, tunnels, systems connecting them. The circumvallations, moreover, seem generally to contain the mounds, and sometimes a smaller circumvallation is surrounded by a larger one. Whether these colossal structures were intended for worship or for defense, it is impossible to decide. More probably, however, they were of a military character, provided, as they ordinarily were, with cisterns for water. But whatever their origin, they derive interest from the analogous fact that within the same territorial limits have been dug up vases of earthenware or copper in elegant forms, pipe bowls decorated with human heads of the type of the existing aborigines, or with those of birds, domestic utensils, personal ornaments, hatchets of some stone, and lastly, weapons of copper or mica or shell or obsidian. Now, this is important because, again, what did we just? I mentioned Emperor Tigrinus. Now, remember, he had a shield that was completely covered in mica that reflected light like a mirror. Um, and in Arizona, they had an entire building made of seashells. I just want to make correlations again. Further investigations of the ruins of the great city will no doubt bring to light rare antiquities of a prehistoric nature. I made no attempt to dig for treasures. It was enough for me to know that I stood where the most ancient people had lived and labored, fought and struggled, died and disappeared, leaving behind them only such gigantic monuments as those I have described to mark the spot where they had been. So yeah, important parts to remember there, right? The canal correlations are huge. Coming from coming from my Mississippi material, um, we talked a lot about the bayous of Louisiana, Mississippi, and how they are completely man-made. And we're talking, hundreds of thousands of not only square acres, but tens of thousands of, you know, or thousands of square miles, even all the way over to Florida, all along the southern states. They even exist in Georgia. We've shown them in Texas, all the way to Arizona, as I stated before. And in Arizona, they're still used to this day. They dug them out and found them to be of superior quality and construction that they couldn't even replicate. I wanted to talk really quick about pottery, um, since that was probably the last focus on that article there, just so we can kind of keep it a little bit of an overlay going. So, yeah, a city of 11 million people, southeastern Arkansas, marked by endless mounds, huge canal systems, large walls, huge abutments. And that's only what lies buried above ground, right? You can only imagine what's below. Now, some of these mounds are shown to be roughly stacked stone, while other mounds are shown to be perfectly chiseled, no cement required monolithic mounds. Um, You remember in the Mississippi episode as well, we talked about the giant wall of the Mississippi, right? A continuation of the Great Wall of China. Um, in the earliest articles, they described it as a highway. And then you give it 50 more years, and the Mississippi and other rivers have overflown their abutments enough, and they've washed away the sides of this highway to show a gigantic wall. A wall so large they never found the bottom. And the capital of Mississippi was built by stealing the bricks or the stone. They weren't bricks, they were huge blocks. But the capitals and different buildings, the men of this area called it the quarry. They and I believe this has been a common theme as well. We've talked about the Smithsonian dismantling buildings and stealing mummies and all kinds of relics. Further in this episode, we're going to talk about the steamship Gopher. The steamship Gopher, important name to remember because we're going to cover it in other states. This was a steamship funded by a university like Smithsonian System that was traversing the rivers of southeastern America, stealing all kinds of stuff. This gopher ship went up and down Florida for like 3 years, um, digging up countless mounds and keeping all the relics. The article we'll get into here, the local authorities are pleading for help from the federal government because this steamship is just, stealing whatever they can. That seems to be a common theme, doesn't it? And this one we're gonna go to 1901. It's called Portraits on Clay Vases. Again, for continuity's sake. I don't know. I'm having all kinds of presenting issues. It's frustrating. Hopefully it works this time. All righty. Portraits on Clay Vases. Delineations of human features cast hundreds of years ago, probably death masks of human before the Indian was lord of the American forest. Discoveries of Smithsonian Institution. Now, this is a kind of, unfortunately, a hot topic of sorts when it comes to discussing Aboriginals of America. But as I've been showing in every state, there are 2 or 3 levels of, quote, Aboriginals. So, the Native Americans stand on ancient buildings and ancient empires that they have no understanding of whatsoever. And then you could go back several thousand years and find a civilization themselves standing on the foundations of a previous race. This is like one of the underlying features of my presentations, that we can't just talk about who lived here in the 1700s or the 1600s. We're talking about several events wiping out some incredibly prehistoric and advanced peoples, getting us back to perhaps that vapor canopy age where America was covered in huge tropical vegetation from Alaska to Florida in um, the same type of a climate. And along with that huge tropical foliage and climate came gigantic creatures. Now remember, the Emperor Tigrinus was 3 levels below, 3 civilizations below Earth, and he was fighting saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths. And he was over 7 feet tall. And you've heard me talk about 40 feet tall, 50-foot tall men. So as these epochs stretch farther away from us, animals and trees and everything gets larger. But yeah, back to the article before I get too rambly. What are, in all probability, I apologize for the quality on this one. It's not as good. It looks okay on the stream. What are, in all probability, veritable portraits of the race which inhabited the northern portion of this continent, may years before the Indian occupation, have received at the Smithsonian Institution? They are in the shape of clay vessels, having wrought upon them their surfaces representation of human features. So perfectly lifelike, or rather deathlike, are the best of these strange works as to lead some to the belief that they are in reality death masks of the Aboriginal people. This is interesting because coincidentally, I don't really believe in coincidences, but I was posting on Twitter yesterday. I was showing the mask of Palenque. And I've often said that the mask of Palenque was like a ritual death mask represented for in the movie The Mask with Jim Carrey. Why don't I just pull up my. Let's just go look at my post real quick. Well, why not just show you instead of talking about it? All right. So this is the mask of Palenque. Um, it's called his death mask. He's buried with this. They found it on his body. Um, this right here is a picture. This is a modern representation of the bat god, which I won't even try to pronounce his name. Chilam something difficult word. He looks quite different, and people had quite a interesting reaction to me posting that. But um, in a previous thread, I showed how the Mask of Palenque was had a lot of interesting overlays with the movie The Mask with Jim Carrey. The jester god was very, very prominent in Aztec and Mayan culture. Um, and it was incredibly prominent in Phoenician culture. So the mask wearing with a kind of over exaggerated smile as well as a stoic face. This map here is done by Maurice Cotterell. Maurice Cotterell is one of my favorite authors. I've talked about him before. Here you have Palenque, and you can see the jester head here, right? Clear to see. And then you have the bat god here. Hopefully everyone can see this. Um, Maurice Cotterell's work is incredible. I recommend every single one of his books. I don't agree with everything he says, but his correlations between all of these peoples of the world that I've been speaking of, the Brahmins and the Druids and the sages, all these people having all these continual overlays. Again, Micmac, Egyptian, Finnish, Phoenician, endlessly. He makes the same correlations. He talks a lot about this quote Christ-like figure that exists in all these mythopoetics. He shows a lot of interesting correlations with the deluge and so on and so forth. Anyways, why is that important? Back to the article. Where was I? Oh, I think I just closed it. I hope I didn't. Everyone can see what I plan on talking about. It looks like I definitely did close it. So while I find that article, yeah. So the Palenque stuff is great, and like I said, because we're in anomalous America, getting to Mexico is going to be difficult. I plan on doing a whole series about Mexico, and he's definitely going to be part of the series that we talk about. Um, People have heard me talk about some of the cities on the Yucatan having direct correlations with the Etruscans, and I've done a few episodes now doing my best to present some holes in the kind of literary understanding of who the Etruscans were and how we can correlate them with people in America. I've talked about the Aztecs were considered half breeds between Etruscan and um, quote Mayan. Now there are even holes to describe who the Mayan were, but um, yeah. So let me. Apologies, I just got to go back and find the article. Thank you again, everybody, for joining me today. And my typical bumblings as there it is. All right. Again, problems when you have too much material, and I do a poor job of labeling. Okay. Where was I? Here we go. So, yeah. I was making the correlation between death masks and some of the Aztec culture, and this is a very, very strong overlay with the Aztec culture. In some of my Atlantis videos, I show these death masks existed amongst the Yoruba people of Africa. These death masks actually exist with a lot of different tribes, and I believe there is a common ancestor to all of these types of things. They are in the shape of clay vessels. Yeah, okay, I've already covered that. The potteries, 8 in number, were discovered by the agents of the Bureau of Ethnology and mounds in the vicinity of Pecan Point, Arkansas. Like other earthenware vessels, which have been discovered in a similar manner, they were associated with human remains in graves or mounds. And the attempts at portraiture, apologies, events were evidently intended for the persons with whom they were buried. In not all cases have the bones of the dead been found with them, but this is held to indicate that the bones have been crumbled to powder. The question as to whether or not these vases were made exclusively for sepulchre purposes, must say the Smithsonian experts, remains unanswered, as there can be found no source of information upon the subject. Such a purpose is, however, suggested by the resemblance of death given to the faces, which do not present a single feature characteristic of Indian physiology. So, as I stated, this is not to say a race predating who the quote Indians, because remember, when we say Indians, that covers many phenotypes, not just Mongolian or Tartar or quote African American, even though there's a lot of misnomers that go along with that statement. But it's everything, right? There were white Indians, there were black Indians, there were Indian Indians, Tartar, Mongolian, on and on and on. All of them, they quote pagan, uh, living off the land. There was every phenotype here in America. The nose, however, is small and the nostrils are narrow. A description of the best specimen may be taken as typical. The face would seem to be that of a youngest Persian, perhaps a female. The features are well molded and are so decidedly individual in character that the artist must have had his mind a pretty well definite conception of the face to be produced, as well as the expression appropriate to it before the beginning his work. It will be impossible, however, to prove that the portrait of a particular person of age was intended. The closed eyes, I'm just going to skip ahead here for the sake of time. One of the most unique and striking features of this extraordinary portrait is the pattern of incised lines that covers the greater part of the face. These lines are deeply engraved and somewhat scratchy. Now, for those of you that may not have seen it, you'll see one of my Atlantis members videos that's now made completely available to everybody. You'll see the thumbnail shows one of these carved face, one of these masks, and it's identical. Um, the facial scarring is another um, big marker. Scarification correlates a lot of things. You can even correlate language as well as pottery types. And the Yoruba people of Africa have a lot of overlays with this scarification. And what they're showing here is that we're dealing with a very similar people that made death masks, and the people were obviously familiar with scarification. Now, we're not just dealing with the surface tattooing, we're dealing with actual scarring. These lines are deeply engraved and somewhat scratchy in appearance and were apparently executed in the hardened clay. In size, the head is 5 inches in height, 5 inches in width, and ear to ear. The aperture of the vase is in the crown and is surmounted by a low upright rim. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead because for the sake of time. The left side of the face is plain with the exception of a figure somewhat resembling a grappling hook in outline, which partially surrounds the eye. The right side is covered with a comb-like pattern placed vertically with the teeth upward. The middle of the forehead has a series of vertical lines. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Upon the forehead at the top, there is a small perforated knob or loop. Similar appendages may have been seen upon Mexican terracotta heads now in the Museum of Mexico. Huge note. I've been working very hard to make correlations between not only, quote, Atlantis, because scarification was supposedly a part of Atlantean culture, but showing resemblances not only in language, but in pottery, but also in these types of body modifications, piercings, so on, existed strongly amongst the Aztecs, the Mayans, and far, far up the Mississippi Delta. And here we are in Arkansas, showing the same thing: death masks, scarification, appendages similar to the Mexican terracotta. Now, terracotta, again, I've shown through many of my articles now that some of the oldest examples and most advanced examples of terracotta exist here in America. Where did it come to? How did it get to China and to Japan? I think it came from here. The headdresses is of a worthy note. It appears to have been molded after a cloth or skin cap. It extends over the forehead, falls back over the back of the head, and terminates in points. Two layers of the material are represented, the one broad, the other narrow and pointed, both being raised a little above the surface which they rest. This vase's head is somewhat smaller than the average human head. These prehistoric portraits offer fascinating fields of conjecture regarding the racial characteristics presented. Nothing more than conjecture is indeed possible. Adjacent to them are figures of some Egyptian mummies, not especially well preserved, indeed, but still presenting in their blackened and partially decayed features some of their distinctive characteristics. A comparison of these ancient human remains from the far off land of the pharaohs with the masks or portraits from Arkansas of the prehistoric people of this country discloses a truly striking and wonderful resemblance. Again, finishing very strongly, this author does here. This is 1901. He's saying that now we're connecting again the mummies and masks. And as I have stated previously, showing that much of America is covered in Egyptian iconography, as is Mexico, the correlations are endless. But Arkansas is showing that below the quote Aboriginal or Native Americans, we're dealing with a race of people that have Egyptian and Mexican overlays. So yeah, love that one. It correlates nicely because of the potteries we were just discussing. We covered City of the Ancients. Let's jump into caves. 604 already. And I do a horrible job, so I appreciate all you guys. I'm just always so worried about packing as much material into these episodes that I just never pay attention to chat, and that's something I definitely need to work on. I say that every week, and I don't do a good job of it. 112 people watching. Thank you, all of you, for joining me at such an early hour. It means a lot, and I hope you're enjoying the material. Yeah. Where was I? Caves of Western Arkansas. So yeah, what have we talked about so far? We talked about a city covering 560,000 square acres, inhabiting more than 11 million. Now, if you've only seen this one episode, that's going to seem incredibly outlandish. But for those of you that have joined me through, many of my Anomalous America episodes, will by now see that that's one of the underlying features, as we're dealing with absolutely gigantic cities, incredibly advanced cities, incredibly advanced canal work, large abutments, huge walls, advanced wall construction. And yeah, America was probably covered in thousands and thousands of cities housing millions and millions of people. The population of America, 5, 10,000 years ago could have easily been 100 plus million, 200 million or more. And it's been buried one after the other. So where are we? We're in Caves of Western Arkansas. This is from Arkansas, 1913. This is going to lead us into quite a fascinating stretch of articles here. This is a long one, 2-pager. So appreciate you guys for sticking with me through some of the nauseating amount of reading that I do, but I appreciate it very much. Remains of Confederates Powder Magazine, Caves of Western Arkansas. Interest among the tourists to the White River County this summer is upon the caves in the hills, hundreds of which are to be found, great and small, scattered promiscuously throughout the Ozark Mountains. No, you know what I want to do here before we. I want to talk about. I want to talk about the age of the Ozarks. Since we're mentioning the Ozarks, I want to read something really quick that just popped into my head. Okay, let's see how this is showing up here. I think I got to Ancient Ozarks. Okay. Kind of bouncing around today, but I'm just kind of going with the flow in my head. All right, here we go. I wanted to read this before I got into the cave work, and I kind of slipped my head here, and I just clicked off of it like a big old dummy. All righty. This is 1902. The ancient Ozarks. The Himalayas are newcomers compared with them. Um, what I've been saying about time and age and mountains appearing and disappearing overnight, and a lot of my Atlantis and Lemuria work shows that through upheavals and the sinking and rising of continents and the deluge and many of these other things all seem to correlate nicely with one another. And the author here is going to postulate some pretty striking things. Men speak in wandering words of the beauty of Yara, of the grandeur of Everest, of the awe-inspiring canyons of the West, of the Andes and the Alps. But no man has ever looked upon a scene more incitive to thought and profound meditative imagination than the rugged hills of the lower Ozarks. So the Ozarks extend between Missouri and Arkansas for those who aren't aware. And the lower Ozarks, obviously, being they stretch into about the middle of Arkansas and Little Rock. Little Rock is an interesting place. It's the center of the state, and it's named Little Rock. And don't get me started on the Eufaula Stone and the Atlantean overlays just there, but also the name Kansas. He who climbs the Jura stands upon a peak of the modern world, but the man who stands upon the highlands of the Ozark County looks upon land so old that the brain becomes weary. Is at tempting to measure its ages. I apologize, that's some kind of typo. Though measurement be made in epochs, not in thousands of years, the Himalayan mountains have, during some thousands or millions of years, poured their deposits into that body of water which we know as the China Sea. And by filling the basin of the sea, have deposited so much alluvium that the empire of China, with its untold population, now occupies a space over which the water once flowed unrestrained. Look to your maps and note how large the lowlands of China are. Conjecture the depth of the alluvium deposits in those lowlands, and then comprehend, if you can, the ages during which the Himalayan mountains have been busy filling up the basin of the sea, and by wash of the tides and overflow of the rivers, building the land of China as we know it today. The brain wearies of the effort. We are incapable of comprehending such almost infinite time, and yet we do know that the mountains of Asia are the youngest mountain ranges on earth, and that the lowlands of China belong to the last days. We may grasp a suggestion of facts by comparison sometimes. If the Himalayas are the youngest, the Ozarks are the oldest of the mountain ranges, and between the dates which give them the birth, the Rocky Mountains, and the Appalachians, and the Apennines, and the Alps, and the Andes, and the Nevadas, the Circassians, the Caucasians, the great mountain ranges of Australia and Africa had birth. Yet these were not reared suddenly by some continent creating explosion, but slowly, surely, tenderly, as it becomes Mother Earth to develop her giant children. Thus, by analysis, we arrive at the age of the Ozarks, yet fail to comprehend, for we cannot measure their ancient height, nor picture the stormy world. We can dimly imagine revolving, enveloped clouds, the rain in ceaseless torrents descending, and the wide ocean rolling free and unbroken, save were the Ozarks, breast the waves and turned the tide back upon itself. The lover of nature finds food for these reflections when he visits the regions south of Springfield, Missouri. During the recent campaign, it was my privilege for the third time to answer a party call to go into that most picturesque and, to me, delightful portion of the state. Springfield is located upon a very high tableland. Much of the country surrounding it is level as an ideal seafloor. Yet the city lies at an altitude of about 1,900 feet above sea level, and Cedar Gap, a few miles to the east of Springfield, is now the highest place in the state. There are some lead mines in the section, and thereby we know that the wash from higher levels once flowed into that one time valley, for none of the lead there is of plutonic origin, but is all a reconcentration of other deposits. It follows from this consideration that the tableland of Greene County was once washed by the Turanian Sea on the west and by the ocean on the east, while to the north the Ozarks reared their masses very far above their previous height. Natural changes are very strange. The valley has become the highlands, and the mountains of old are now simply big hills divided by creeks and rivers, which have eaten their way deep down into the primary rocks, and the soil and the great piles of rocks which once crowned the Ozarks have been washed away and now constitute the alluvial deposits of Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, and Kansas. Cedar Gap is strangely misnamed. It is not a gap. It is a promontory. It is the only land in Missouri entitled by its elevation to be called a mountain. Yet, it is not a mountain. It is simply an arched neck of land connecting two elevated plateaus. And north and south of it, deep cut valleys make railroad buildings and transportation improblematic. North of the railroad, water flows into the Gasconda. South of the railroad, water flows into the White River. The railroad ride at Cedar Gap and about 1 mile to the east brings into view, looking southward, a scene of wonderful beauty. Heavy rainfalls during many ages have cut the land into 10,000 fragmentary hills, and 1,000 small channels might be counted from the car windows. It is probable that the country immediately south of Cedar Gap may never be very productive of minerals, for that section represents an area not of the deposit and reconstruction, but of waste and erosion. Its mineral wealth is being carried, or has been carried, to lower levels. But if it lacks in this, it is fortunate in other regards. Its narrow valleys rise abundant crops, and its hills grow apples, peaches, grapes, pears of exquisite flavor. Vast stretches of primary forest provide cheap lumber, cheap fuel, and an almost inexhaustible grazing ground for cattle, hogs, sheep, and goats. And when, in the course of time, railroads traverse the section, we may, with reason, anticipate that the great springs and other water powers of Ozark, Stone, and Tawney counties may be utilized for extensive manufacturing. Now, this is an important thing to touch on because we're going to get into the water systems here and the cave systems and how they're correlated. And we're going to talk about Mineral Springs, Arkansas, which is just a radium hotspot, and why those things are so important to remember. Now, the washing of these hills and mountains and so forth and so on, similar to like what we talked about in the Colorado episode with the Rocky Mountains. The rivers and streams are filled with radium. Now, the tops of these hills have been coated in it. Radium has even been extrapolated as the sources of all electrical phenomenon in the atmosphere. Rocks emit radium, which is just pure light, traveling at near the speed of light, slightly slower, and they ionize the air. And these effects are curative to a sense, but they also produce, like I said, large amounts of ionization of the air. And high humidity correlates even better with this, right? And the more humid regions of especially the Southwest, but other parts of the world are far more prone to lightning strikes. That's a bit off topic, but yeah, I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna speed it up just so we can get through this. The ride from Cedar Gap to Mountain Grove is neither picturesque nor interesting, expecting the facts that we find the Mountain Grove, a small counterpart of the Greene County Plateau, and we note the surprise that whereas Greene County has 3 channels of drainage to the south and the west, Wright County has but 2 to the northeast and to the south. In brief, somewhere between Springfield and the Grove were crossed the backbone of the Ozarks, and we were unconscious of the change. But as we turned southward into Douglas County, we again faced the evidence of time's titanic energy, in which little waterfalls are singing merry music to the wastes and solitudes. We watch wild birds, unscared, which lazily float in the air. We look on either side of us and see great ledges of rocks and the bluffs, straight for strata on either side at equal height. Then we know that we are living in the presence of the ages. Time has plainly written its lessons there, that we may learn. We pass from ragged Douglas into more ragged Ozark County. There is a range of hills in the western part of the Ozark County, which probably marks the highest original plain in the old mountains in that section. These hills rise to an elevation of about 900 feet above the lowest lands in that district. They are almost bare of vegetation and are rapidly wearing away. It is reported to me, upon good authority, that seashells have been found upon these hills. I believe the statement to be true, although I did not myself climb to the highest points, for it is well known that the sea once covered the entire belt. Even when the mountain ranges to the north were far above the water, the physical feature of the country indicate that a range of high submerged land at this point formerly connected the Ozarks of Arkansas and Missouri. The land in Taney County was largely formed as an alluvial deposit. This fact is established by the character of the soil upon the high level lands in the neighborhood of Brown Branch and Bradenville, and is further supported by the deposit of considerable quantities of iron ore and jack in the lower sections of the county. The zinc deposits there are not rich in percentage, but are in large. And I'm just going to pause there on large bodies before closing the brief article. The larger Ozarks let me describe a scene in the western part of the Taney County of such character, scope, and beauty as to command the rapt attention of any lover of nature who may be fortunate enough to see it. At a distance of some 5 miles northwest to Forsyth, the winding road climbs by easy approaches far up the southern slope of the mountain. We pause below us in the abyss. Above us, the mountain rises 200 feet. Many miles of the southwestern Bozeman Mountains is dimly seen upon the horizon. We look southward into Arkansas to point where the hill joins hill and other hillside valleys. We think it all one level plain, yet between us and these points which limit our vision, we look across a sea of hills, and we know that the deep valleys are there. We trace out their dimly defined valley of White River. On and on and on and on. The basin into which the Ozark poured their lavish treasures before White River ate its way through the divide and drained the valley and the Gulf. So it was a bit romantic and a bit long-winded, so I apologize for that. But again, the caption is by far the most important part. The ancient Ozarks, the Himalayas are newcomers compared to them. That may seem like a stretch, but now we're going to get into some of the cave systems and explore that concept a little bit further. And we will talk about a 300-mile cave system found inside the Ozark Mountains. Arabian Night Wonders, a cave in the Ozark Mountains surpasses in extent that of Kentucky. Now, these systems, as I've stated before, I believe are all interconnected. And when we get to Missouri, we're going to connect those dots a little bit further as we show that the subterranean parts of this realm have been vastly buried and lie far, far below the ground. And that, like I've stated so many times, that these mound systems are really just huge buildings, parts of big cities. And the best evidence for that we'll find in Missouri. So, yeah, again, everybody, I appreciate you for sticking with me through some of these long-winded ones. I know they can be a bit torturous. And thank you for all 117 of you here today. Again, this is 1913 Caves of Western Arkansas. Interest seen among the tourists to the White River County this summer is upon the caves in the hills, hundreds of which are to be found, great and small, scattered promiscuously through the Ozark Mountains. Excuse me. There is an uncanny fascination in wandering about with Mother Nature and viewing the works. And I just realized I didn't even. You're just staring at me reading. That's not fun. So yeah, lots of good stuff lined up for this month. Yeah, lots of great collabs. Gonna be trying to do more of those. I've kind of shied away from the collaborations just because my schedule is a nightmare when it comes to trying to figure those things out. And over the time of 4 months or so of having this channel, 5 months, whatever it is, I've had to cancel on people, and that's a pretty shitty feeling. So family is the priority, but finding the correct time and way to do things. And so, yeah, I'm working on some pretty awesome collaboration stuff that I plan on coming out with this month. Um, yeah, stay tuned again for the 10,000 subscriber live stream. I gave you a little teaser uh, clip of the article I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff, but kind of all things hidden tech. Um, Yeah, the hidden realms of America predominantly, but the whole realm. Um, the Radium series, I've already got 3 episodes lined up for that, um, which I love. I think it's one of my favorite series. I've got kind of a wrap up episode. It'll probably be the last one for the Etruscans. Drive some really important points home with their language and the correlations between the mythos of the Etruscans and the Finnish Kalevala. And yeah, a lot of the Finnish Kalevala undertones exist strongly here in America as well. So yeah, August is going to be a fun month. So it's going to be a busy month. So stay tuned to lots of new material. There is an uncanny fascination in wandering about with Mother Nature and viewing the works which she has wrought underground. There are many kinds of these caves that have been explored more or less. Bat caves, where the strange little creatures, half bird, half animal, are to be seen by the thousands. Marble caves with vast corridors and chambers, where drip by drip the water falls from the roof, heavily charged with lime, creating after a long period huge stalactites and stalagmites, which sometimes meet and form solid pillars of marble of various hues. Caves in which large deposits of zinc ore are found, being literally storehouses of zinc carbonates and silicates. The Marble Cave, located near Garber on the north end of the White River Railroad, is the most attractive, partly because it is in direct line with tourist travel, and partly because it is the second in size in America and far the most interesting from a geological standpoint, on account of the many curious water formations of rock found in its subterranean passages. The opening to the cave is on top of a hill, and the entrance is made down a ladder some 60 feet long. One passing along and seeing the hole would not suspect the depth to which it leads. After descending the ladder, the main corridor leads off, sometimes narrow and low, and sometimes high and wide. In many places, great chambers open up that would accommodate a company of cavalry. These chambers are full of curious stalactites and stalagmites of pure marble, and these the cave takes its name. These formations in one chamber, which is designated as the throne room, are of gigantic size, and at one end have formed at a graceful angle, several meeting, forming a huge marble throne chair. A small river runs through the cave, and as in Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, the fish are blind. In the cave, the scientists found this spring a number of white salamanders, a reptile that resembles a lizard 7 inches long. These were blind and were the first of their kind over to be discovered. Probably meant to write ever, no, lots of spelling errors in these. This is an interesting cave directly across the river from Cotter that has the same kind of an entrance as the Marble Cave, and which also carries an underground stream. It is so not so large and does not have the strange and curious formations of the former, but it is one of the points of interest. There are two blowing caves in the Arkansas Ozarks, one in Batesville and one in Searcy County near Big Flat. All summer long, a cold blast blows from their mouth. In the winter, they suck instead of blow, owing probably to the difference in the atmospheric conditions. So this is really interesting feature you find with a lot of caves, not a lot, but with caves all over America that for 6 months of the year they blow out air and for 6 months they suck in air. Um, the breathing of the earth and the subterranean realms is really interesting. Um, they find tides in some of these cavern systems. Um, and the magnetism and atmospheric pressure correlations are really interesting. Do they have direct relation to the outer air? I don't know, but it's definitely incredible that there is a kind of calculated um, ebb and flow to the air in these caves and their temperature. It's very interesting. As above, so below. These the subterranean world is connected with the world above ground as well. White River has been exploited as a health resort. It is claimed that the air that comes from this cave will cure hay fever. Before we end here, we're going to get into some of the hot springs. Hot Springs, Arkansas. Quite an incredible place in the 1800s. One of the most frequented of quote vacation destinations was Hot Springs, Arkansas. And we've talked a lot on this channel about um, hot springs, aroma baths, um, you know, the sauna, right? That exists in so many cultures. It's pretty hard. It's undeniable at this point. And that a lot of these saunas existed in rock formations, and radium emanations played a huge part in this. And the curative properties would later be attributed to radium, and that the steam was permeated with radium. And again, as I've stated, the medium in which the human is exposed to radium is incredibly important. Water, steam being the most effective manner. At one time, not many years ago, a company was formed to build a hotel over this cave and to use the air that came from its mouth as the sole ventilation for the building. Now, we're going to show us, again, Mineral Springs, Arkansas, where they built like 20 resorts over these vents. It's pretty crazy. Beautiful place. Excuse me. I need a stretch. Okay. They intended to operate it as a semi hotel and sanitarium. Now, the sanitarium thing I've kind of shown was very interesting, and that I've gone as far as to say that the radium emanations and were being used for everybody, and that whole towns were building their fountains on radium spring water. And the concept of Ponce de Leon and the chasing the fountain of youth. I think these fountains of youth existed all over. They were everywhere, and they were often the foundation or the center of a city or a population. and the sanitarium, old world. People, there's been a lot of videos. People have done a lot of videos on this, so I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. But it strongly correlates to radium, and that's what I think these were. And they were always labeled as like the first kind of vacation destination. When vacation and holiday was kind of a new um, term, essentially, right? America being repopulated after some kind of event, and the idea that these sanitariums perhaps come from a previous age. It's very interesting. Correlates with a lot of the stuff we've been sharing here. Whether or not these buildings were part of that situation, or the buildings were newer or older, I can't say for sure. There's definitely a lot of examples of sanitariums that seem far too advanced to be built in the 1840s, 1850s, and onward. But yeah, the ore bearing Arkansas Ozarks have been confined to the mineral belt and have invariably been broken into by miners, having no known outlet. The fact that they contain zinc ore is probably due to this reason, had they had an outlet, the ore would have passed off in solution, as it is soluble in water. Three very distinct openings have been discovered during the past 2 years in the mining district, one at the Red Cloud Mine on Rush Creek and another at the Philadelphia Mine on Clobber Creek in both Marion County, another at Madison Mine in Boone County and near Zinc. Both of the openings in Marion County have been practically filled with ore, tallow, clay, and rock. In some places, this formation was soft. In other places, it had been solidly welded together by the water carrying lime and zinc in solution. The opening at the Madison is well defined and has been explored as far back in the mountain as a mile and a half, and at the end was not reached then. In this cavern, in many places, one has to crawl. The roof is so low. In other places, it opens out wide and forms chambers. Some places it is like a hillside, and one can look down 20 feet to the bottom of the other sidewall, which at this place is full of curiously wrought portals of several feet across that open into other passages. You can hear water always running, sometimes above you and sometimes below you. We're going to hop to the second page here. In the larger chambers near the roof, the water has cut away shelves, and on these are deposits of tallow clay, which has been cut into fantastic shapes and resembles old castles and battlements. The ore in this opening lays below the floor of the cave. Desultory mining has opened up some 85 feet of ore bearing strata, which was very rich, but the cave has never been fully explored. Many of the smaller caves have their silent histories. There is the old saltpeter cave in Marion County, where the Confederates mined and refined saltpeter to make gunpowder with during the Civil War. Many of the old kettles which were used in the refining process are scattered over this section. Today, among the farmers who use them to scald hogs in and for the family washing, the cylinder head of the old donkey engine with which they used to draw their dirt from the cage is buried open and up in the front yard of Wim Amer of Amos. Near the little town of Oakland, 20 miles north of here, a short time ago, a number of pieces of Indian artwork in the shape of carved sandstone were taken from the cove. Ed Ferris, manager of the Arkansas Missouri Telephone Company of this place, while exploring a cave on Buffalo River with his father in law, came upon a skeleton caught fast between two rocks, an only record of a silent tragedy enacted years before. And in many instances where caves are handy to civilize, they are used as refrigerators in the summertime by their lucky owners as a storage rooms in the winter for fruits and vegetables. H.B. Brown, a merchant who lives at Cricket, had such a cave near his store. In the summer months, he was able to purchase eggs and keep them fresh for quite a period. And in the winter, he used it as a vegetable storeroom. North of Mountain Home is a cave on the farm of Will Taylor, where he and his neighbors keep their vegetables and fruits in the wintertime. Nothing freezes. The temperature is practically the same in winter and summer. The caves in the Ozarks present an interesting study to the geological student and to the man who likes to find thrills in unknown recesses of the bowels of the earth. Another long-winded one. Um, the picture I'm trying to build here again is that, like most places along the Mississippi River, we're dealing with a complete subterranean world. I would say that Arkansas and Kentucky are covered, are literally standing on top of some of the largest cave systems in the world. Now, I don't want to cover this entire article here because it mostly exists in Missouri, but this can be kind of a bridge between states. Um, but it's an important one to talk about. To give you an example of what I'm saying, I'm just going to read the first little caption here, and then you can stay tuned to next week's episode, Missouri, as we go deeper into the subterranean worlds, the buried subterranean worlds. Arabian Night Wonders, a cave in the Ozark Mountains surpassing in extent that of Kentucky. In the deepest vastness of the mysterious Ozark Mountains, 18 miles southeast of Galena, Missouri, is perhaps the greatest and most wonderful natural formation in the world. The famous Mammoth Cave of Kentucky has long been looked upon as the greatest marvel of the kind in the known world, but its greatest depth is only 9 miles from the entrance. Hidden away in the Ozarks is a cavern which extends over 30 miles and has ramifications which, when fully explored, will undoubtedly, says a correspondent of the Philadelphia Press, show cavernous chambers and openings extending more than 300 miles. The existence of this cave has been known for about 10 years, and its position makes it so difficult of access that no exploration has ever been made which will tell of half the wonders to be seen in the underground palace. The word palace is used advisedly, for the interior of the cave is lined throughout with the purest white marble and variegated onyx. Stalactites and stalagmites adorn the walls and top and bottom of these magnificent rooms with fantastic forms and odd shapes, which give the whole an air of some olden palace. So, yeah, we'll cover more of that um, in Missouri episode. But you can see the correlation, as I stated before. The Ozarks extend far into Arkansas, and the cave systems in Arkansas are endless. They found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, and many of them they never found the ends. We're going to talk a little bit about relic hunting and relics being stolen, and then we're going to jump into a book, and then I'll share a few small, non-long-winded excerpts from newspapers about things they found, and then we'll wrap this all up. Hunting relics in Arkansas. Russellville. There seems to be an insatiable desire on the part of man today to see what manner of man inhabited the earth in its early ages. That's kind of like what we're doing, huh? But only in the past few weeks has it become known that Arkansas has been the scene of quite work along this line for the past 2 years. Some years ago, the Indian mounds of Toltec, okay, there's a town called Toltec in Arkansas, go figure, near Lenoke yielded some excellent specimens of pottery and implements, which found a place in the Smithsonian Museum. Of course they did. But they are not classified as being from Arkansas. Now, this is something I've talked about before. Just like the mummies of Colorado and Utah, the Smithsonian, right, at the behest of the government and the state government, who was pleading with the federal government to get these Smithsonian people out of their state. And what does it say here, right? Oh, the Smithsonian was happy to take these relics, but then they didn't classify them as being from Arkansas. This is exactly what they were doing with the mummies they were finding in Colorado. In fact, verbatim, they were shipping them to Europe and labeling them Egyptian. Now, isn't that interesting? So it doesn't say what these were rebranded as being, but you can see the kind of manipulation of relics. And stay tuned this month. I will be putting out episode one of my Smithsonian series, where we dive into the foundings of Smithsonian and talk about Smithsonian himself and his background, where he got his money, his love of ancient and ancient curiosities and relics and so forth, and how that led to the establishment of the Smithsonian Institute. But yeah, big part there, right? Not classified as from Arkansas, of course, and they're found in where? Toltec, Arkansas. Many traces of high civilization were found by De Soto's men in the 16th century, but the Indians could tell nothing of them. Exactly what I've been saying, and exactly what the evidence has been showing, and this goes back through just about every state, that the quote Aboriginals or Native Americans are standing or living in or on or around these ancient cities, yet have no idea who built them or where they came from or how old they are. The Hay Foundation has been sending out expeditions in America and has at presence. I've talked about the Hay Foundation. I've showed their nasty roots and where they get their funding from, and so on and so forth. It's no different than the Smithsonian, and it's almost like a boys' club where they're fighting over toys, you know. Um, and has at presence one in the Ozarks and another in New Mexico, where they will excavate two of the seven cities of Cibola. This is the Hay Foundation explorations we discussed in my New Mexico video. The Ozark expedition has been in Arkansas for some months and is now in southern Missouri. It will be of interest to Arkansas people to know that in the Museum of the American Indian at Broadway and 155th Street in New York City, there is an excellent exhibit from Arkansas containing much fine pottery. The museum, or Hay Foundation, was started in a small way a few years ago by George G. Hay, a philanthropist who seeks to preserve the early art of America. Yeah, he keeps the really, really amazing stuff, and the rest is on display. You know, some pots and some arrowheads, and not like the really crazy Atlantean stuff that we talked about in some of these previous ones. You know, all of the stuff that they got in New Mexico, where with the oldest redheaded mummy and the mummified turkeys and the oldest, stone battle axes and so on and so forth. That stuff, it's all gone. You won't find that anywhere. An expedition brought forth more and more valuable relics. The museum was twice forced to move to larger quarters and now occupies a place worthy of its treasures. This just constantly reminds me of the kind of storehouse symbology that exists with the Smithsonian, where they just have a basement full of treasure, kind of like the Indiana Jones. If anyone's seen that movie, I can't remember which one it's in, where he's wandering around in the giant storehouse. I think that's probably very much a reality. A few days ago, the finding of several human skeletons under the high cliffs of White River. Now, remember White River? We talked about the White River earlier. Was reported, and these were estimated to be from 1,000 to 1,500 years old. This expedition is from the Hay Foundation and is in charge of Raymond F. Harrington, who has spent several years in Arkansas and is now at work in southern Missouri. Last summer, Mr. Harrington found a number of very fine specimens of pottery near Eureka Springs under a cliff. Mr. Harrington says the tribe could not be confused with the cliff dwellers of the far west, as these people lived low under the cliffs, which jutted out usually above and over the rivers, while the cliff dwellers built high above the ground. So there was something called the Arkansas cave dwellers, and they built um, very similar homes to the cliff dwellers. Now, the cliffs weren't nearly to the extent or height that we see in the American Southwest, but you may remember in I believe it was Colorado episode. It may have been Utah. I think it was Colorado. Some of those cliff dwellers, their systems extended so far into the actual mountain that they found, again, 30, 40 miles of caves and huge internal city structures. And they describe that the so-called dwellings that you see on the outside were actually what they seemed to be more of a defensive structure, and that the doorways, the homes, or the kind of buildings, whatever you want to call them, that you see on the cliff faces were actually just doorways into these subterranean realms, um, in the mountains. And I postulated and showed several articles that kind of touched on this a bit further. And I think that's exactly what we're dealing with here. They're calling them cave dwellers, not cliff dwellers, and they say that they lived under the cliffs with jutted out, usually far above the rivers. But that's just a small um, detail. I believe they were also living inside. When we're talking about hundreds of miles of cave systems, and one of the only mummies found in Arkansas was wrapped in turkey leaves, or turkey feathers leaves, and wrapped in a similar manner to some of the mummies from the Arizona and the New Mexico area. So I definitely think we're dealing with a very similar people. What do we have left? Paradise Found and Hot Springs. Okay, and we got about 20 minutes. Yeah. So again, love you guys. Thanks for being here. 125 of you. I want to finish with Hot Springs. I was going to finish with this book, and seeing as where we're at with time, it's probably not logical here. But for those of you that are interested, archive.org, it's called Arkansas Odyssey. This book is incredible, incredible, incredible. And if you choose this particular one, this older publication here, um, Michael B. Dugan, 1944, you'll get a highlighted version. Somebody invested a lot of time, and I've read about half this book leading up to this episode, and it's just full of amazing stuff. Like, just look at this. We talk about star forts. People have heard me talk about star forts, but these old post maps from the early 1800s, incredible. Um, these are everywhere, all along the Mississippi and the Arkansas River. These forts, and this kind of Civil War French narrative when it comes to forts, it just doesn't hold water because many of these existed in the early 1700s. So how does that work? Who was building these in the 1700s? History with Albert Pike. There's just a ton of fascinating material, cool images, mud flooded buildings, um, all kinds of stuff in this book. Um, I could have just done a 2-hour presentation on this book easily, probably longer. Um, they talk about a little bit about sanitariums. They talk about um, all kinds of stuff, really. So I recommend this book for those who maybe want to dive a little bit further. Arkansas Odyssey. Okay. The saga of Arkansas from prehistoric times to present. Really, really good. Okay. This is February 21st, 1919. We're going to do this one. Then we're going to do Hot Springs of Arkansas. And we'll show some pretty cool older pictures. Tended. Paradise Found in Arkansas. Curio collectors discover exquisite relics of mound builders' art and natural steps. And the surrounding county near natural steps is hidden away places is a paradise found for the energetic curio collector, mainly of which is an Indian burial ground, which is supposed to have been established by the tribe of Quapas, who inhabited the state of Arkansas in years gone by. The burial ground is situated in the vicinity of the Arkansas River. Excavations covering a period of the last 10 or 15 years by several different collectors have yielded many exquisite pieces of the Indians' handiwork. Now, remember, we started off the episode talking about an ancient prehistoric city, gigantic, covering 560,000 square acres. I mean, that's just an unfathomably large area. Hundreds and hundreds of mounds, some sticking from 5 to 30 feet above the ground level. But as I have postulated and shown all throughout these episodes. Jose, thank you for your sticker. I appreciate that, brother, very much. Um, that these go far below ground level, far, far below. I'd say 3 or 4 stories. And some of the Colorado ones, they went even farther. So when we're talking about a city of that size, and kind of like what we touched on in the Mississippi episode with the Great Wall of Mississippi, that everything is below. Everything is below. That wall went down 60 feet and they never found the bottom of it. And in 1830, it was called a prehistoric highway. So this 60-foot wall had been buried so long that people were walking their horses on top of this wall and calling it a prehistoric highway and had no idea they were actually walking on the top of a gigantic wall. And I've shown the same thing in Rockwall, Texas, but there are actually several places in Texas that this wall exists. This wall has been found in Louisiana, and I believe that these walls extended all along the Mississippi, and that all along the Mississippi we were dealing with hundreds of millions of inhabitants, um, building incredibly advanced structures, stonework, abutments, buildings, walls. You'll remember in the Mississippi article we talked about are the bayous of the South completely man made. They found advanced stonework, advanced walls, drawbridges, canals, hundreds of miles, hundreds and hundreds of miles of canals. The entire bayou system, he said, was completely sculpted by man. Not only was it a flood barrier, but it also was an incredible way of growing crops. And we'll talk about Indian corn, ancient corn, giant corn. I've stated this before, and they found giant corn in mounds in Arkansas as well. That they not only found full standing stalks in tombs, but also found corn itself that they planted, and it grew unlike any corn they've ever seen before. Okay, where was I? Many different pieces of their art have been found, ranging in sizes from their baked clay pipes of peace to large olas, some as large as bushel measures. The olas are somewhat similar to our modern soup bowls, out of a fine quality of clay, the top of which tapers to a smaller diameter than the bottom, and was used by the Squaw Indians for storing their grain and for other uses for which they had occasion. Much of the pottery is of the common kind, while some of it is finely made, etched with weird but beautiful designs. Now, some of this pottery was found to be etched in such a advanced manner that they can't explain it, and that the kind of technology that goes into advanced etching is pretty fascinating. And we've made correlations in episode 1 of Anomalous America that the finest Grecian, and remember we said or we showed in some of my Etruscan videos that when we talk about Grecian pottery, we're talking about Etruscan pottery. That the Greeks got all of their forms of pottery from the Etruscans, how to make it, how to glaze it, etching, so on and so forth. And that one of the big markers of the Etruscans having roots and foundations here in the Yucatan and the Gulf of Mexico and up the Mississippi, as I'll state and show further, is their pottery and their pigment glazing, etching, and that the correlations here, uh, you'll see again the Aboriginals, quote, Aboriginals, Native Americans standing on the surface of 2 or 3 or 4 layers of buried civilizations are the crudest form, and that the deeper down you go, the pottery gets larger and far more advanced. And in no better place do I have a representation of this than from Anomalous America, Alaska episode. Pigments were used which only Indians knew the secret of making, and the way they had of applying the different colors, which have withstood the test of time of several hundred years under the earth, has been quite puzzling. Right. Again, the glazing is also advanced. The chemicals required, the percentages of chemicals, and all these things, and how they can withstand, thousands of years buried beneath the earth is quite interesting. In another location, not near the Indian burial grounds, is very good evidence the mound builders inhabited this part of the state also, The Arkansas mound builders were a race of much forgotten people, somewhat on a scale with the Indian, resembling them to a certain extent, but their history dates back many years before the Indians. Yeah, and then we can go even deeper and deeper. They were said to inhabit certain parts of the United States at the same time or before the Aztecs inhabited Central and Southern America. Now, we've shown even the Aztecs themselves said that they came to inhabit the Yucatan, but they came from the north. And some of the most ancient pictographic representations of Aztecs were found in Arizona. And I postulated that that large canaled, um, not just one city, but dozens of cities were quote Aztec. You know, we talk about Toltec, but that just seems to be more of a, um, I wouldn't say religious sect, but a different group, not necessarily a different phenotype or race. The mound builders' mode of living was for several families or perhaps an entire tribe. Now, again, this correlates with the gigantic buildings of the American Southwest that have been torn to pieces or lied still buried under the earth, and they correlate very nicely with the advanced pyramid structures found all around the Yucatan. And again, as I stated, even in their lore, they say they came from the north and they were pushed by warring tribes. Um, Yeah, and they describe again, I've quoted this so many times, but in their kind of historical understanding that the Earth or America has been destroyed by four cataclysms, and I definitely see three in perhaps the quote Native American or Aboriginal Indian represents the fourth age. For several families or perhaps a tribe, this correlates very nicely with the mounds of Colorado, where they thought they were mountains, and then they got inside and found it was a giant dwelling place for an entire tribe. And the construction similarities here are quite striking with some of the larger mounds found along the Mississippi and the Arkansas River, built out of logs and sometimes made more substantial by building out of huge stones, covering the entire building over with a certain sort of clay or earth. So again, the burnt clay adobe represents the top or perhaps even going down one base layer. But as we go down two or three or four layers, we're finding immense stonework, um, correlating nicely with the rest of the Anomalous America series, right? With some sort of clay of earth, which was then burnt from the outside, thereby making a secure retreat from their enemy tribes and a snug habitation in which all of their property and belongings were stored. In the coming centuries after their disappearance, their buildings were not made strong enough to withstand the elements. See, again, as we go up civilizations and get closer to our own, things get far less advanced, and you have these kind of weird issues here. They were not strong enough to withstand the elements. The entire mass collapsing and running together, and in present day, we are only fortunate enough to view signs and indications of their habitation by running across the mounds, some of them covering a space of an acre or more, and being reminded that they were a more energetic and enterprising race or tribe of people than were the Indians who had no fixed location of their abode. Now there were Indians that had fixed location, but the hunter gatherer type that we're kind of identifying it here, at least in this article, um, they followed the animals. The mound building race and the mound building race again, folks. There are several layers to even the mound building race. There are more advanced further below, and the canal, super advanced canal work, super advanced agricultural systems are related to, I would say, two, if not three levels down. The mound building race probably succumbed to some sort of malady or plague or were annihilated by the different Indian tribes who came from other parts of North America to seize their excellent hunting grounds and warm climate of the South. Yep. So again, the correlation there is great. We're talking about curio people just stealing shit, which is just horrible. Um, again, as they go deeper down, they're finding the mounds get more advanced. In fact, they go from being shitty adobe that can't withstand the elements to advanced stonework. And that was probably the most important takeaway from that article. And now we're going to get into the hot springs of Arkansas. We'll show some pretty cool pictures, and then I'll cover a bit of my shorter excerpts. We'll talk a little bit about the ancient corn that correlates again nicely with we're dealing with the same people. This ancient corn was found um, in Arizona, New Mexico. So I think we're dealing with the same people using the same agricultural seeds, essentially. And the seeds were very advanced. And in an age of GMO that we talk about today, right? Genetically modified organisms. You can see that I think that not only were we dealing with a very advanced culture and that their agriculture shows this. I mean, their wheat. We talk about the Phoenician overlays with seeds and wheat and barley and rye and how those things found their way here. We made correlations again between Solomon and his fields of gold, his fields of wheat, barley, and also corn, and the agricultural age and the advanced construction. They go hand in hand. And the Finnish Etruscan um, overlays here take us to, I would say, the second, if not the third layer of civilization, correlating again with the Aztecs and the Etruscans being half breeds of one another, and they were intermarrying and cohabitating this land we call America. Coming to the end here. Appreciate you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Got about 10 more minutes. Yeah, thanks for sticking with me. Um, a little bit longer, long-winded articles in this one. Um, yeah, so probably not my favorite way of presenting. I definitely don't like reading super long ones, but um, some of them are worth it. Um, this one doesn't have a date, but it's 1880s, 1886. I want to say it may have been. No, it may have been 1866 or 1886. I apologize when he goes off so many of these. Generally, they're printed on the paper, but some of these PDFs they don't. Hot at Hot Springs, Arkansas. Picturesque views of our American Baden, however you say that. Hot water from nature's subterranean boilers. Sumptuous baths for the rich. Mud hole for the poor, but the bath is good. Cornhole. One of nature's most tremendous chemical laboratories is that at Hot Springs, Arkansas. Now, I've postulated on this before, and for those who haven't seen my collabs with Dr. Longo, I have discussed at nauseum that many of these hot spring areas were bought up um, by Flagler and the Rockefellers, and that they weren't for the rich. This was for everybody in the city. And that I've talked about that many of the figurehead fountains that existed in the city squares were radium spring water, and that anybody could come to the central spring, the central part of the town square, and drink this life-giving healing water. One of nature's most blah blah blah. Did I read that part already? Yeah. Here are mountains and waters and rocks and mud and heat. The springs appear to be the venting holes of subterranean mineral factories and machine shops. The heat comes from away down deep somewhere, heaven knows where. Now, in my radium work, I've shown that radium melts granite. Radium is very much directly responsible for the creation of what we would call lava. Um, it drives and moves this internal kind of iron ore vein, like um, almost almost like a living organism, and that it also, by breaking down minerals, it creates a large cavity. It causes sinkholes. It causes natural gas wells. It causes oil. Man, there's so many things related to radium here. And also, when we talk about the heating of air in subterranean waters, are directly related to radium. I've done endless work on this and shown the relations between French and American scientists in the late 1800s, early 1900s, traveling the world to these famous hot springs, and showing at least these quote healing ones that were known for having healing properties, that radium existed in almost every single one of them. And this is going to be a perfect example. The springs are reached by the Missouri Pacific Railway Iron Mountain Route. Now, Iron Mountain is an incredibly interesting place as it's noted for having uh, an iron ore percentage, unlike almost any other place in America. It is the only line to the springs. Nearly all travelers pass through St. Louis on the way thither. In the city, the Iron Mountain routes courteous, courtiers, and accomplished passenger agents, Mr. H.T. Townsend. He will give ample information to invalids and others seeking the healing waters. The Arkansas hot springs may be properly considered the Baden-Baden of America. Rheumatism, gout, and skin disease are cured here. The waters do injury to those who have heart disease or consumption. Isn't that interesting? For anyone that's been in a mineral spring or a hot spring, um, I actually used to vacation with my parents before I had any idea about this, to one of the biggest hot spring areas in my home state of Oregon, on an Indian reservation, of course, in the middle of the desert. And for those who aren't familiar with it, if you get in this warm water, it causes incredible raising in your heart rate. You can feel your heart beating. And for some people, it's incredibly uncomfortable. So with heart disease or consumption, respiratory illness can cause injury to you. Or, I know of consumption being healed with radium emanations, or the kind of breathing in the atmosphere of the radium. And the old world prides itself on its antiquity. The ancient Romans themselves used to visit the springs, there to be cured by their high nosed ailments. I mean, the Roman bathhouse is stolen 100% from America here. And who perfected the Roman bathhouse? Well, it wasn't Roman, it was Etruscan first. And the Finnish had a similar construction. The Phoenicians, and I mean, again, this is just like the overlays between language. They're endless, and they connect a lot of people that so-called had no correlation with one another that seem to obviously do. And in a museum of antiquities that they place, the relics of those distinguished visitors are shown, preserved and shown. The hot springs were known to and used by the Indians ages ago, long before the white man ever entered the ugly but picturesque valley in which they are situated. The land upon which they flow belongs to the United States government. They are at the foot of Hot Springs Mountain, which is a part of the government reservation. The town of Hot Springs is a long, strangling settlement on both sides of the ravine at the foot of the mountain. The springs are on the east side. On the east is Hot Springs Mountain, on the west Mountain. Government has expanded a large amount of money on the creek formed by the outflow of the springs. Once it was walled in and arched over, but burst forth where it was not wanted and made another large hot spring. So again, um, ancient stonework. We showed some of this in Mississippi, and it goes on and on. But they kind of gloss over it here. Were the Indians, building these, walling this in and arching it over? It's definitely possible, but I think it comes from a previous age. The resident population of the town of Hot Springs is about 7,000. The visiting and invalid population includes members of Congress, doctors of divinity, gamblers, lawyers, and ladies, a great mixture. So a real uh, touristy town for the healing properties of the water. New springs occasionally burst up and bubble over. There are now 71 of them known. The water of the hottest will cook an egg in 15 minutes. The government authorities have built two great tanks, which together hold 50,000 gallons of water. The water from the springs is led into these tanks. They fill at night, and their contents are ready for use the next day. It is from these tanks that the baths are supplied. I mean, just think about that. There are two tanks. They hold 50,000, so they go through 100,000 gallons every day, and this is in the 1800s. Okay, this article was written before radium was ever discovered. So that's an important thing to note for you guys. How much farther do I want to go into this? They talk about building naval hospitals and treating the I guess we will just keep going. The ground is leased from the government hereabouts, and upon it, hotel keepers and bath managers erect such improvements as are desirable for the businesses. The springs are open the year round. February is said to be an undesirable month to visit them on account of the rainy season. It is too hot midsummer. Hotel accommodations are good and constantly improving. The government is building a handsome and costly new hospital here for sick Army and Navy men. It is not yet completed. A better spot for a United States hospital could have been selected, for the hot springs constitute the most famous health giving waters in the United States. Again, the government was even building a place for their soldiers here. There is something very particular about the waters. They are not strongly impregnated with minerals, some lime, some silica, a very little iron, carbonic acid, and salts of soda, potash, and magnesia. Very small quantities of each are found on analysis. The fluid is mostly a pure hot water. Now, again, if they had discovered radium, I guarantee you, and it's noted in further literature past the early 1900s that these mountain ranges were rich with radium. So it's pretty much without a doubt. But again, this was written long before its quote discovery. Yet so powerful is it. Now, I've talked about Bohemia glass. This is something worth noting. Bohemia was one of the largest radium mining operations in the world, and it was ran by a certain German conglomerate. And Bohemia glass had been made for hundreds of years, and it was glass impregnated with radium. It glowed in the dark. Um, and they would fill these cups with water and let the water sit in there. And the water would then be impregnated by the radium glass. So radium has been around forever. It's been well known. And it just its quote discovery, or its supposed discovery, documented discovery by, again, a Rockefeller chemical company. There's no coincidence there. Yet so powerful that it is said, if an old drunkard who is pickled through and through in alcohol be put into a bath and kept a few minutes and then taken out, the water will be quite black with the impurities that have been soaked out of him. Now, as somebody who um, takes quite a lot of Epsom baths, depending on how, I've, I've had quite the list of injuries to my body, and um, during the winter months, Epsom baths are pretty regular for me. I can attest to this, that when you take a hot Epsom bath, I even add a little magnesium and a little potash, sometimes salt of soda, depending, you'll leave a black ring. Um, this is normal. Your body, through your pores, ejects all of these things. Your body's an amazing machine. And, the pores, cleaning the pores, ejecting the toxins is incredibly important. Finished with a cold rinse, as the Finns and many others had done. Really important. Beside the springs that are leased, there is one very large one called Mudhole, which is free to the public. Black, white, and mulatto get into the muddy water together and remain as long as they like. It is the resort of the poor who bear for once in their lives get a bath. Another peculiar spring is called Cornhole. Here, ladies and gentlemen of the highest walks of society in separate compartments sit with their feet in the hot mud and water for the very unpoetical purpose of soaking their corns off. The progress is remarkably successful. Bathing in the hot spring water induces profuse precipitation. Liver and kidney troubles are alleviated, and the sick man seems to be made over new. So such a fantastic one. I'm going to show some pictures now. Pow, 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 pow. Appreciate you guys. I'm going to wrap up with some pictures and some smaller articles really quick here, and then we're going to call it a day. Hope you're enjoying this. Stay tuned for more throughout the week, as always. Trying to stay busy with this, fill it as much as I can during nap times. That's my recording time. So, however nap time goes is however much material I can get out. All right. Yep, I gotta make it full size, and there it is. Here we go. Hot Springs, Arkansas. And I'm going to show another one. But this row right here um, were kind of the individualized resorts. Some were public home or some were private homes. But you can see this is 1886. Incredible little town. Okay. Electric trolleys, although in this picture they weren't electrified yet. Whether or not you want to go as far as to say that these trolley lines existed and they had to relearn how to electrify the trolley lines, but they become electrified not too far after this image is drawn. But look at this, pretty incredible, huge buildings, beautiful buildings, tiny little tourist town. I'm going to show one more here that shows it kind of lists the bathhouses and shows you that same line, except this picture is even older. Pretty cool. These are all the bathhouses. You can see all the steam. Look at that. It's just steam is just issuing from this just naturally. There's nothing even built up here. Just incredible. You know, here's one of those fountains again that I was telling you about, guys. This water is coming directly from the subterranean, and you could drink this water. Just like the kind of Ponce de Leon Fountain of Youth story. This wasn't one place. The stories of the Fountain of Youth, they're everywhere. But yeah, I think this one was 1886, and the one I just showed you was a little bit later. As you can see, a lot of the construction has changed. But yeah, still very beautiful. Remember, it was considered one of the most powerful healing springs in all of America at the time. All right, and we're going to look at some smaller individual articles really quick here. Mhm. Which one do I want to read? Oh yeah, let's do that one. Shit, I close. No, I didn't. Okay. So I wanted to talk about Barry Seal and the gun running CIA operation that was going on. Some of you are familiar with that Tom Cruise movie where he played Barry Seal, the airplane pilot who was smuggling all the drugs in. Here's a funny little clip. It led me on a very wild tangent. Um, Super interesting. Mina, up to date. This is from the 1800s. The Arkansas Gazette says the story of Major Lamar Fontaine of his discovery of the remains of a prehistoric city in Arkansas, which he estimates to have contained at one time a population of 11 million. We've read that article. Is being discredited in the East. Yeah, remember the scholars were saying there's no way, but I definitely believe it. If matters not, if they do discredit the story, they cannot get around the fact that less than 3 years ago, Mina was discovered. Quotations. Mina was discovered in Arkansas and is now an up-to-date town. And careful estimates indicate that it will either have at least 11,000 if inhabitants, if not 11 million. So basically, what they're saying is this town was quote discovered. No, it already existed, and there's quite a interesting mud flood amount of buildings in Mena, Arkansas. And when you go into the story of Barry Seal, oops, and the Clintons, they were landing in Mena, Arkansas, and they were storing the drugs underground. And isn't that interesting? So that was just something that popped up and led me on a random tangent. I had no idea that the Barry Seal Clinton Contra stuff was landing in Mena. I thought that was very interesting, especially considering I had clipped that article about Mena being a falsely discovered city or a city that was already there but had been rediscovered, essentially. And they basically kind of cleared it out. And that correlates with the drug running. The underground and the subterranean world is, been so much hinted at, especially in the last 10 years, as being kind of this haven for, um, you know, all of these darker parts of human life. And I just think that was interesting that I found that article and led me on that random tangent. What else do we got here? Petrified man and found in Arkansas. Oh, this is a good one. We can do this one. And then we'll do one about corn and we'll wrap it up there because the corn one is really important to cover. A petrified man found in Arkansas, the real thing said to have been discovered. Does the state want to buy a petrified man of an antediluvian type, or at least it is for 99 years in the case of other organic law should be construed to prohibit the sale of a human being? An aged man called on Assistant Attorney General Rector yesterday and stated that he had a petrified man in his possession and that as it had been unearthed in the vicinity of Eureka Springs, of course, Eureka Springs, another not quite as popular as Mineral Springs, but another healing spring town. The state ought to think enough of its former citizens to buy them up, particularly if they had such staying qualities as seem to be exhibited by the stone man in the old gentleman's possession. Pictures of the image were exhibited and a number of affidavits produced as the genuineness of the find, which was discovered in the course of excavating for a well in the mountain region. The stone man is diminutive of stature and is not more than 2 feet high. Now, dwarfs and pygmies we'll get into even more as we move through Missouri and Tennessee. We're going to show the pygmy population it's very interesting. It's Lord of the Rings stuff, I'm telling you guys. It definitely seems more realistic as I read more and more of these articles. And now we'll find the corn one really quick. I can't remember where it was. Corn from the mound builder's tomb. Here we go. Corn from a mound builder's tomb. Dempsey Waggy, a farmer of Madison County, Indiana, has raised corn this year from seeds which he says were taken out of a mound builder's tomb in Arkansas, estimated to be 2,000 years old. Now, I've shown the correlations again between this corn and the corn of Egypt, and that the pharaohs were buried with corn, and that the corn showed incredibly eerie markers of being the corn, this exact corn. In fact, it was it was called mummy corn even in the 1800s. Now, going back to the information we stated about the Smithsonian stealing all of these artifacts and mummies and shipping them over to Europe and labeling them Egyptian, it wouldn't be too far off to see the correlation that I'm thinking we're dealing with two of the same people. The stalks of corn are from 10 to 12 feet in length and are somewhat on the order of a tree, being as thick at the ground as the man's wrist. 3 feet from the ground, they shoot out 3 long palm leaves. The leaves are heavy and very solid, resembling a cactus leaf. Some of them are 5 feet from tip to tip. These are the only leaves on the stalk. About 2 feet further up are the ears of corn. So that's 5 feet. Now remember, some of this mummy corn that they found grew over 15 feet, and the lowest stalk of corn was over 6 feet. How tall people are we dealing with where you're picking the corn, but the lowest available stalk of corn or ear, sorry, is 6 feet up, the lowest, and it extends all the way over 10 feet. We're dealing with giant corn here. Many stalks bear 6 ears, and some have fewer than 4. At this rate, it is figured that the average yield to the acre would be about 250 bushels. Above the ears, the stalk continues 3 or 4 feet and is topped with an elaborate tassel. The husks surrounding the ears are heavy, and as the corn matures, they break and curl back, revealing a firm, yellow-grained ear. The grains are so solid and exceptionally good for feeding. Important correlation that connects a lot of dots. I've talked about mummy corn. We found it in Arizona. We found it in California. There's one more. This from an even older article that correlates again the same representation here, and then this is where we're going to call it. One of the most unique things which Dr. Curry shows a visitor to his home is a crib of corn of the same variety as that grown centuries ago by the so-called mound builders. Several grains of the corn was found in a pot taken from a mound at Marked Tree, Arkansas, some years ago by John Shannon, a resident of the town. The finder took the pot of grain home with him, but as the corn appeared to be parched and worthless, he threw it out of the doors. It was during the rainy season in the spring, an ear of a long and single shoot of the corn came up. This was closely guarded, and late in the fall, several ears of the finest corn known were gathered. Dr. Curry heard of this find and secured several of the ears of the corn. He yearly grows a fine crop of it, feeds it to his stock, and declares it to be superior to any other corn. The ears grow exceedingly long, the grain being rather small. It is of rich golden color. Yeah. Thank you again for tuning in. Um, Appreciate everybody. Early in the morning. Hope you're still enjoying the series. Missouri is going to be an absolute blockbuster. Some of my favorite articles I've ever found: Missouri, Tennessee, Ohio region. But yeah, so stay tuned throughout the week, and stay tuned for um, my 10K live stream. Yeah, where are we at here? 113 of you watching. Appreciate y'all very much. So, yeah, we'll end it there. Thanks for sticking with me over 2 hours. Appreciate it. Some of those were very long winded. And yeah, love you guys. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday and have a wonderful August. Starting it off with a banger. Love you guys. Bye.